Okay, and we're recording. And so I'll go ahead and I'm going to give a brief introduction here and then hand things over to Clint, who will hand things over to Elena. So I just want to say good evening and welcome to the 7th year of the annual David James Poisson Endowed Creative Prose Reading Series. As a reminder, if this doesn't happen automatically, please mute your microphones as you join us. Please also be aware that we're recording this event, as I said just a moment ago. My name, as I said a moment ago too, is Dr. Will Donnelly, and I want to start by thanking you for joining us tonight. This reading series would not be possible without the generous support of people like you. Thank you to those of you who have already donated to help make this series a reality, and for those who haven't, please consider speaking either to me or to Dr. Sandy Meek or Dr. Clint Peters about making a donation to this endowment. If you're a student and you're hoping to receive CE or cultural events credit for attending this event, please be certain to register your Zoom account with your Berry College email address. You do have one. Every Berry College student has a Zoom ID. And it will be the way that we can track and then follow up on your attendance later and make sure that you get that CE credit. If we don't have your Berry email address connected to how you're logged in, then we're not going to be able to award you the credit, and we want to do that. So please do that. Please also expect a brief survey from me within the next several days. It's very brief, and upon satisfactory completion of that response, you will receive the CE credit. And so at this point, I'm going to turn the reading over to my Berry colleague, Dr. Clint Peters, who will introduce our visiting author tonight.
Hey, everybody. It is great to see you. We have 205 people here on the Zoom chat. I'm so excited about that. Thank you all so much for joining us. You are not here to listen to me, so I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible. Elena really doesn't need much of an introduction, but I will start off by saying, actually, real quick, I have my fan on. Can you hear that? Is that noisy? Okay, good deal. To anyone who asks, I say, Elena Passarello is the best essayist alive. Fascination, playfulness, and an underbelly of sincerity form the 3 ingredients to the Passarello souffle. Whatever idea you had about a subject, she will pluck it from your consciousness and replace it, a magic trick of seeding ideas and images without readers realizing because they are absorbed and often laughing. As nature writing luminary Helen MacDonald said about Elena's second book, Animals Strike Curious Poses, it is, quote, the best book on animals I've ever read. It's also the only one that's made me laugh out loud. After reading Passarello's essays, I can never again see red-shoed Dorothy without imagining Judy Garland screaming profanities into a curtain. I cannot picture Mozart without his canary, Jumbo the elephant without seeing the violence of the electric chair, or Coco the gorilla without blushing. I will never imagine Marlon Brando, Bella Stella, without conjuring the hordes of people who descend to New Orleans to attempt it each year at a competition that Elena herself has won. The best Stella scream. The secret is, she is dead serious. Such so that she wraps her meaning in images so scrumptious you are tricked into becoming enlightened. She is a Whiting Award-winning essayist and former actor. Her work is also in Best American Science and Nature Writing, the New York Times, National Geographic, Slate, the Iowa Review, and many, many others. She also announces Livewire, a show broadcast on over 140 stations on Public Radio International. She teaches at Oregon State in Corvallis, and if her accolades weren't enough, her students who I have met at conferences rave about her and often end up writers themselves. I can't wait to see her 3rd book on Elvis Presley woven into a wondrous shape. Please welcome writer, teacher, screamer, Elena.
Thank you, Dr. Peters. I appreciate that so very much. We should all be so lucky as to be introduced by someone who is both kind and smart and who sort of barks up the same tree as we do. As a fellow essay enthusiast, essay evangelist, and animal writer, and, you know, I would say, gregarious writer, right? There's not a ton of us. I feel like I'm in such good hands to have my work considered by you in an introductory capacity. So thank you. And thank you too to Dr. Donnelly, who introduced me to his students just a few hours ago in his introduction to creative writing. Yes, intro to creative writing class. I got to speak with them for about an hour and a half, and it was so energizing and exciting and very obviously reflective of the kind of spirit and energy and rigor and interestedness that is afoot among the Vikings at Barry. I just wish that I could be there in person. I was going to be here in March, maybe even on my birthday, I think was when I was scheduled to be there. And then we tried to do something a little bit later this fall, but obviously we can't do that. But I've tried to put something together for all 197 OMG of you that uses Zoom in a way that will make this reading hopefully not just digestible, but maybe specialer. Because my whole philosophy with going through with this pandemic has been, what are the things that you can do in these sort of new formats that you wouldn't be able to do anywhere else? So I'm going to put that to the test in the reading that I give you guys tonight. I hope it works. I have some audio visual things. I have 2 essays oh great, thanks, applause from Clint. It's weird to just kind of like speak into the void and not be able to see anybody's faces. It sort of feels like I'm living in my own head right now. Who's out there? Somebody say hey in the chat. Who's out there? Who's with me? Who's still alive?
Hey.
Hey, David. Hey, Colby. Hey, Peter. Hey, Xander. Hey, Laura. Hey, Alyssa. Hey, Destiny. Hey, Sarah. Hey, Hannah. Hey, Heather. Hey, Desiree. Great. Thank you. Okay, now I feel like I'm in a big old group of people. That's great. Okay, hi Julian, hi Claire, hi Eunice, yes, hi Brianna, hi Taylor, hi Jesse. All right, let's talk about animals and death. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I have 2 essays that I am going to read for y'all tonight. Hey Josiah, I notice you, Josiah, I see you. Both of them come from my book, Animals Strike Curious Poses, which came out about 3 years ago. Hey, Madison. And this book is a collection of essays about famous animals who have been named by humans, by human animals, and who have wheedled their way into the human cultural memory in some way. I know that Dr. Donnelly's Intro to Creative Writing class read an essay about a woolly mammoth named Yucca, who was frozen into the Siberian permafrost and then thawed out thanks to climate change, and had this red fur attached to her that we named her, humans named her Yucca, and it changed the way that humans understood what a woolly mammoth looked like because she was a redhead, which had never been imagined before. I think they read an essay about a World War I carrier pigeon named Cher Ami, who saved a lost American battalion in France in 1917. And maybe Celia, right? An essay about the only animal to be brought back from extinction, or the first animal at least to do it, which was this bucardo named Celia. And then the process of de-extinction, which is actually a term coined by two Georgians. So yeah, those kinds of essays are in the book. The 2 that I think I'm going to read pieces from for you tonight, each one is I'll probably read for about 15 or 20 minutes. I've got a starling and I've got a rhinoceros. So I wonder, where should we start? I know people are writing their emails and putting them in the chat. So maybe Clint, if you could unmute yourself, Dr. Peters, should we start with the starling or should we start with the rhinoceros?
I know my students really love the starling.
Oh, great. Oh, great. So, okay, great. So let's starling it up. Okay, and for that, I have some audio visual cues because this is an essay about music. It's an essay about the fact that Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who you may have heard of, we don't know very much about him. But one thing that we do know is that at a certain year of his life, he bought a bird and the bird was with him for several years. And one of the reasons that we know about it is because he scribbled in his notebook a little tune that the bird sang to him. So in Mozart's papers when he died, one of the things we found was this little note about buying a bird and the fact that it would sing Mozart's own work back to him, which I just thought was like the happiest, most joyful thing. So I'll start with, I won't read the whole essay, or maybe I will. We'll see how we do. But I also have a couple of little sound cues so you can kind of hear some of the music that that I talk about in the essay. Okay, so I think I said everything that I was supposed to say. I hope I'll just say one more time how grateful I am to have been invited to come to Barry in this capacity, and how delighted I am to read for you all. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A. So thank you very much. And here we go. This is Vogelstar, an essay about a starling. I'm gonna pull up my Spotify just to get, okay. So, whistle a little Mozart to a starling in a cage. If it knows humans as creatures that sing and are sung to, the bird will shut its beak. It will arch its starling neck, bending towards your puckered lips. It might bob its dark head back and forth at the Mozart line you sent out, the dotted pops of Papagino Papagina, or the crystalline shards of the rondo for glass harmonica. And though a caged starling is chatty during the day and downright garrulous at night, at the moment it locks in on your Mozartian whistle, the little bird will only blink, aiming its entire soundless self toward the music that's coming from you. Note how it nods along with your tuneful body as if to say, yes, yes, I have it. But a starling is no parrot. Do not expect that when you whistle, twinkle, twinkle, you'll immediately hear a little star in return. You're gonna have to come back whistling for a day or a week, confirming the sound's place in the world where the bird perches. And when it does spit back whatever Mozart you fed it, it will be on a starling's zany terms. The theme from the Hofner Symphony punctuated with guttural warbles, or the famous adagio from his clarinet concerto mixed into an uncanny impersonation of your dishwasher. The Queen of the Night aria, sung in a screech worthy of a Bee Gee. A few days after that, your line of whistled Mozart will come back from the birdcage as a barely recognizable string of filched sounds, all sung together in a line so arrhythmic, it's catchy. You'll hear Mozart, your own voice, the white noise of the house you live in, plus the recesses of starling instinct. The sound the bird makes goes a little something like this. Twinkle, bzee, twink, hi, how are you? Doorbell, doorbell, cool, checker, 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 little, brr, 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 little, cranging smoke alarm, lit, hi, how are you? Toll, twinkle, little, that Bee Gees screech again, star. This will then be repeated with the maddening obsessiveness of an EDM concert. We're not sure why starlings engage in such behavior, but we think it's because this breed is hardwired to sing to its tribes. There are many in a starling's life. The little tribe of the monogamous pair, that of the clutch family, the flock in the field, the mob coming home from the neighboring fields to roost together overnight. And all these tribes are sonic. This sonic sense of the tribal might explain why, when we see a trilling mob of 10,000 starlings, each bird watching its 7 closest neighbors for the slightest change of speed or angle, dodging hawks en masse with shrieks and chips and beak beats and hard whistles, we find ourselves calling that group not a flock or a swarm or a drove, but a collective noun that's drenched in sound, a murmuration. So, what kind of murmur began that spring day in Vienna when a 28-year-old Mozart, jaunty in his garnet coat and gold-rimmed cap, strolled into a shop just to whistle at a starling in a cage? That bird must have zeroed in on Mozart's mouth as the man whistled the 17-note opening phrase from his recent piano concerto. And I'll pause there. I'll play this twice. This is just a little like 5-second melody that this is what Mozart whistled to the little bird when he walked into the store and saw it. Okay, one more time. Got it? Okay. Mozart's melody riffs in G on a simple line heard in many a folk song, so the starling may have been hearing similar tunes from other shoppers that whole month. Or perhaps Mozart himself had been in a few times and had whistled this line enough for the bird to learn it. But no matter how the starling got the song, on May 27, 1784, it spat that tune right back at its tunesmith, but not without taking some liberties first. The little songbird unslurred the quarter notes and added dramatic fermata at the end of the first full measure. We can only guess how long it held that first warbly G. At the next bar, it lengthened Mozart's staccato attack and replaced his effete grace notes with 2 pairs of bold crotchets. And then the starling had the audacity to sharp the 2 Gs of the second measure, when any Viennese composer worth his wig would have kept them natural and in line with the key. And those bird-born G sharps take the steady folk tune to a more harmonically complex place, ignoring the fermata natural G of the earlier measure and pushing toward the next note in the phrase, an A, which builds a lifted E major chord instead. Mozart apparently loved that edit because he bought the bird on sight. And for good measure, he drew a little treble staff in his expense book and scored the starling's tweaks under the note of purchase. He wrote, Vogelstar, 34 Kreutzer, and then la ba 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 ya ba 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 ba, and under the last measure, an acclamation scribbled in the maestro's quick hand. Das war schön. That was beautiful. There is no other live animal purchase in Mozart's expense book, and no more handwritten melodies. No additional transactions were praised as schön. This is one of the very few things we even know about Mozart's purchasing habits. He'd only begun tracking his spending that year, and by late summer, Mozart had abandoned the practice and only used his notebook to magpie random phrases of English. So this note of purchase is special among the extant scraps from his life. He also bought the bird at a critical point for the classical period. At the end of the 18th century, tunes were never more sparkling or more kept. Their composers obsessive over the rhetoric of sonata form, a 4-part structure that permeated classical symphony, sonata, and concerto. By 1784, sonata form had imprinted itself on the listening culture enough to feel like instinct. Vienna audiences could rest comfortably in the run of classical forms as familiar, and thus enjoyable, narratives. And nobody played this cagey game more giddily than Mozart. Of all the things Johann Christoph Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart brought to human sound, the most important might be a sense of surprise. His compositions, while almost always law-abiding, are full of tricks, leading tones that drop away from roots, accidentals that jar the listening mind from its diverted stupor, and minuets that are too syncopated to dance to. As the saying goes, these caprices, those stuck inside the pinfold of common practice, are what made Mozart a star. As the saying goes in Old German, the music of Bach gave us God's word, Beethoven gave us God's fire, but Mozart gave God's laughter to the world. He found the accidents in song that reminded music to glorify the playful, the mischievous, the pop that sends Jack exploding from the box after so much measured cranking. So the starling's playful G-sharp must have felt more than just schön to the maestro and worth more to him than 34 damn Kreutzer. Think of it. He whistled a tune steeped in Vienna's golden algebra to a thing with feathers, and then the animal bobbed its little head and whistled back to him a glorious, deviant, downright Mozartian wink. This wasn't just schön, this was game, recognizing game. It's difficult to imagine a more priceless moment. One of the greatest thinkers in history, bonding with a bird brain. We still know very little about the starling brain, really. Our catching up with the species' complex body and behavior some 225 years after Mozart's death. Among our recent discoveries about the starling is a sturdy musical form inside one type of starling song. Though the structure allows enough variation for one starling to sound nothing like the bird next to him, all courting males organize their love songs into a 4-part sequence of whistle, warble, click, and screech. Each bird begins with a set of repeated whistles, a kind of reedy introduction. Next, as the feathers of his throat seethe and puff, he weaves a run of maddening musical snippets, as few as 10 or as many as 35, curated into descending tones. Some of these snippets are filched from nearby species like lawn equipment or cellular phones. And it's here in this second movement that the twinkle twinkle meets the jacker jacker and the smoke alarm and the Bee Gees. Then, without stopping, he slams into the third section, that of the percussive click solo. Syncopated and noteless rattles shoot from his beak at presto speed, as many as 15 clicks per second. And then he ends with a fortissimo finale of loud exclamatory shrieks, enough to wake the neighbors. It could take him a full minute to sing through all 4 movements of his song, and then the starling is silent for a moment. Some birds even bow when they've finished. Nearly every courting male in the wild follows this exact pattern. The 4 movements are audible even to human ears if we listen closely enough. Because a bird can log so many random sounds in his song bank, the permutations of starling form are endless. And unlike the work of Mozart and company, there is no discernible meter, math, or key dictating the starling's changes from the whistle movement to the warble movement, or from click to screech. The bird can do what it wants in each section for as long as it likes. This gives the courted female 2 distinct pleasures. She can lean on the familiarity of the song structure, but she can also hear the freestyle within the movement, a report of her lover's unique mind. Because of its tendency to absorb sound, the starling song is not tuneful as much as it is expansive. The world spills into a starling's music. The real meets the obsessive. The merry smashes into the flatulent. The compositions of this species are joyful and ugly and dissonant and divine. And though less predictable than the whippoorwills or the skylarks, this starling song is by no means less confident. And though we know this much about starling composition, the mental process that cultivates these choices, whatever gray matter lets a starling write its own song and wills it to vary its tunes, remains mysterious. After a millennium of searching, we cannot figure out where in the brain this starling song is bred. It's possible that the whole process is the result of a mental function humans simply don't possess, or most of us don't, anyway. Mozart's brain is as much of a mystery as a starling's. It was never autopsied, and his genetic line ended with his 2 surviving children. In 1801, a grave digger claimed he'd unearthed Mozart's skull, but no one's been able to prove it. We've simply spent the past 200 years guessing what went on in Mozart's head. And as long as we keep his 600 plus compositions in heavy rotation, we'll always have half a mind to try to figure him out. His music's heavy presence in our lives, from Twinkle Twinkle Little Star to the Requiem, keeps us guessing. The old ideas of Mozart as this perpetual child or as a mere recipient of dictation from God have dissolved in recent years, thanks to computer studies of his autograph scores that show revision after revision scribbled onto the pages in multiple inks. We now know that Mozart drafted and woodshedded for his entire career. He didn't simply spit music out. Musical ideas incubated inside him for decades. And despite our better understanding of the scope of his efforts, it's difficult to ignore the flighty irreverence that Mozart possessed, both on and off the staff. Many have wondered why a brain that prone to perfection was so hell-bent on vandalism. Mozart loved to chatter, play, and shock. Who, for example, could imagine someone like Bach or Beethoven jumping out of his chair at a performance, as Mozart did, and somersaulting around, speaking of cartwheels, while the soloist committed a boring improvisation on a theme from The Marriage of Figaro, and not only interrupting that lame performance, but then meowing a counter melody over the top of it. We also see a vulgar streak in several prank tunes, many composed in tandem with his masterpieces. There is, in fact, a meow duet in Mozart's oeuvre. Also, the same year that he made the luminous fantasy No. 1 with fugue, Mozart wrote a canon for 6 sober voices repeating the line, "Lech mich im Arsch," or "lick me in my butt." And I, I thought I would play you a little bit from, just in case you didn't believe me that Mozart wrote a song called "Lick My Butt." Here's a little taste of that for all of you tonight.
Lass uns froh sein, morgen ist vergebens. Knurren, brummen ist vergebens, ist das wahre Kreuz.
I hope none of y'all speak German, because I think it gets worse from there. Another song from that period begins with the phrase "good night," sung in several languages, and then a sung word "fooey fooey," and then a filthy line about crapping the bed. Away from the keyboard, Mozart was just as devious with wordplay as seen in the polyglot prattle of his letters, like this one that he wrote to his cousin. Muck, muck, oh, sweet word, muck, chuck, that's good too. Muck, chuck, muck, suck, oh, charmant, muck, suck, that's what I like. Muck, chuck, and suck, chuck, muck, and suck, muck. Some think that the maestro's mysterious brain was troubled by Tourette's, or at the least, an attention disorder. His own brother-in-law wondered if Mozart concealed his inner tension behind superficial frivolity by mixing the divine ideas of his music and sudden outbursts of vulgar platitudes. But this assumes, perhaps too hastily, that the vulgar didn't participate in his divine ideas. Even though we now know Mozart's brain was not God's fax machine, many still describe it as some sort of sepulcher for only pristine sounds. But why didn't Mozart need it all? The vulgar and the formal, the right notes and the wrong ones, and even those whistled a half step sharp. A man obsessed with perfect tone might need to stay on nodding terms with aberration. What if Mozart played with bad notes and uncouth lyrics, with foreign language and nonsense, to hoard all the expression that he could, just as Sturnus vulgaris, the starling, hoards all possible sound in order to sing? And I think I'll stop there with that one. Actually, I'll read one more little scene, and then I'll transition to the rhinoceros. Mozart could have kept his starling's cage in the room with his billiard table, where he often composed, or it might have stood in his bedchamber, where he stayed awake with his quill and notebook. Both man and songbird were prone to singing while the rest of the house slept. But no matter the living arrangements, the bird stayed with him for 36 of the most vibrant months of Mozart's career. The maestro's forte piano was constantly being shipped from the music room out to the Melgrube for yet another subscription concert. Leopold Mozart complained in a letter that his son's home buzzed at all hours with rabble-rousing factions, students, rehearsal groups, goofy late-night jam sessions. Their noise was non-stop and deafening. And Mozart reportedly hated being alone, even when he worked. And for those 3 years, work he did. The costly apartment on the Domgasse saw 60-plus compositions finished in fewer than 3 years. The piano concerto, as we all still understand it, was built in those very rooms. The Haydn quartets premiered there. The Jupiter Symphony began, and Figaro ended. And with these heavy hitters came some of the most singable ditties in the repertoire. The wafting waltz time start to the Piano Concerto No. 21, and the stately intervals of the Romanza for strings. Melodies that 2 centuries of humans have since whistled could have very first been volleyed between a genius and his Vogelstar. And you can bet your arsch that if it were in earshot, Mozart's starling junked all these immortal melodies. As Mozart hammered them shiny, the bird sent the tunes back upside down at half speed and double time and piped one inconsequential middle note for 5 straight seconds. It's not difficult to imagine Mozart valuing this kind of collaboration, as he spent so much of this period reaching out to various songbirds. The starling was just another musician to pump ideas into Mozart's brain, like Haydn did, or Vienna's top fiddlers did, or his high soprano sister-in-law with her gobsmacking range. Among the divas, the composers, and the virtuosi, that cage bird perched the furthest outside the classical box, waiting to eat all the sound it was offered and then spit back strange bits with starling gusto. Picture it. An early morning composing session, the starling's cage near the 60th key, and Mozart flies into the room, fresh from dressing, with his hairstylist still trailing behind him. The friseur is holding the end of the maestro's wig braid like the owner of a spastic dog. The bird stirs as Mozart kicks back the bench and stands over the ebonies. He needs to tease out this theme that's been flitting around in his head for days. He finds the tonic, a sprightly G, and then dances between it and the 4th below, gum, bum, bum. Then he reverses the melody's course and skips it upward, bouncing to the dominant 5th in an arpeggio that smacks the next octave with a Mannheim rocket exclamation point. Bum, 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 bum. Mozart can barely keep up with his pen. He's writing with one hand and playing the melody on the keys with the other. As the notes of the composition zoom onto his staff paper, flapping merrily along just as the form intended, a jalopy fart of notes comes from the cage, countering the pristine run of the keys. Bum, bleep, bum, bum, checker, 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 bum, 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 zik, lick, Mickey, marsh, bah! Mozart turns to the bird, which moves closer to the front of the cage and stares. Starlings are more responsive to human eye contact than most mammalian pets. They know when they're being watched and they aren't afraid to hold a gaze. It's one of the primary traits, along with a high touch response, that allows deep bonding between starlings and humans, as we love eye contact too. One ornithologist has called the starling the poor man's dog for its ability to connect and demonstrate loyalty. And sound assists this connection. What better way to bond than in singing a duet? Mozart opens the cage, and the little bird flits to its arm, screeching that same derailment, bum, 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 let me marsh, as it hops up his sleeve. The man sighs, keeps writing, and the bird keeps yucking and sucking and mucking it up. And now, 2 centuries later, not a day goes by without someone on the planet playing the result. The opening movement of the Serenade number 13 for strings, often called Eine kleine Nachtmusik. Notice how, after the exposition, the serenade dips treacherously into D minor before moving forward at a new major key. All right, let me cue this up for you guys. It sounds as if, for a quick measure, a little devil has whispered something shocking into the melody's ear. Okay, yeah, so I think I'll stop there. Thanks for listening to that one. Let's see.